welcome the host of Epic this week, Mr. Nick Redfern.
Thanks for joining us tonight on Epic Voyages. I'm Nick Redfern, your host this evening. My guest is Dr. Rita Louise. Rita is the founder of the Institute of Applied Energetics. She's also the author of Avoiding the Cosmic 2x4 and also The Power Within. But for this evening's purposes, we're actually going to speak about Rita's new book, which is Man-Made, The Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods. And if you'd like to find out more about Rita's work, you can do that at soulhealer.com. And so with that said, Rita, welcome to the show.
Hi, Nick. Nice being here with you. Seems a little weird being on the other side of the table.
Yeah, it's usually the other way around where you're interviewing me. So it does make a bit of a change, I guess. Kind of surreal as well, a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on the show tonight. And I guess the first thing, before we sort of really kick off with this new book you've got out, Man-Made, The Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods, perhaps you could tell the listeners a little bit about yourself, the work you do, your background, etc., etc.
Okay. I mean, the work that I do, and I've gotten to the point where I say my day job is that I work as a medical intuitive, which is, simply put, is a person that has intuitive gifts that works with people regarding health issues. And I'm a naturopathic physician. But I've always been interested in the paranormal, and actually, before I got interested in the whole world of psychic phenomena, my first love in life was archaeology and anthropology. And so writing this new book just kind of took me yet again to an earlier circle in my life, because I've always had this fascination with ancient traditions and ancient history and art history and architecture and anthropology. And so it just, I don't think people have opportunities or don't take the time to really do what they love and love what they do. And I do what I love and I love what I do. And I feel blessed that way.
Oh, that's good. And can you give us a little bit of background on the Institute of Applied Energetics, what it all basically is about?
Sure. The Institute of Applied Energetics is a distance learning opportunity for people to learn to become a medical intuitive, intuitive counselor, a.k.a. learning how to do psychic readings, or learning how to do energy healing. And all of this work you can learn to do from the comfort of your own home. And so it is a professional level training program. And so it's not for someone who's just looking at taking a weekend course. I mean, it's really designed for someone who's looking to, as my dad likes to say, hang a shingle and do this work professionally. Because it really is like taking a college degree program, the level of work that's required in order to complete the program. But we cover everything from doing Reiki-type healings to reading tarot cards to learning anatomy and physiology and working with herbs. And, I mean, there's just a multitude of different tools and techniques that people learn in this training program, and they can get information about that on the Soul Healer webpage under the training link, and it has a list of all the courses that are part of that program. So it's
all right, cool. All right, and just before we get to the new book, would you like to just sort of tell readers the listeners a little bit about your earlier books?
Sure. One that you didn't mention, Nick, is my last book, which is called Dark Angels, An Insider's Guide to Ghost Spirits and Attached Entities. And the book talks about different aspects of ghosts, working as a psychic and having worked as a psychic investigator with a number of ghost hunting teams. I talk about ghost phenomena or the phenomena of attached entities, but not from the more technical, what you see on Ghost Hunter, we went in with this kind of equipment, but more from what the ghosts are like and what you would experience and more the world of the unseen people that live there, as well as the dynamics, and I talk about ley lines and just a lot of different things, as well as what people can do if you have a ghost in your house and you want to get rid of it or make friends with it, some ideas, tools, techniques that you can play with. My other book, Avoiding the Cosmic 2x4, goes into explaining this is I'm going to shift gears. This is a very metaphysical book. It goes into concepts like the aura and the chakras, and it delves into the Kabbalah, which is the basis of Jewish mysticism, with the premise of if we experience physical disease, it is like the universe giving us the ultimate 2x4 up the side of the head. And so I would think, getting sick is something we would all want to avoid. And so it explains from an energetic perspective why we get sick, and then things that you can do so that you don't have to experience that in your life, so that you can change it before you actually manifest the disease in your body.
Okay. Cool.
Okay. One last book.
All right.
And I'll be very quick about it. And then the Power Within is more the hands-on book. I like to tell people that they're kind of a 1-2 combination, where the Avoiding the Cosmic 2x4 is more of the brain food. Why do things happen and why do we get sick? And the Power Within book is very technique driven. And so if you're experiencing issues, these are tools and techniques that you can use to restore health, healing, and wholeness in your life. Whew. That's everything.
Okay. Well, that's good. Yeah, no need to apologize. I mean, this is your forum tonight to talk about whatever you want to. So, you talk away on whichever book you like. That's not a problem at all. But with that said, we might as well get on to the new book, because that's the one you're sort of primarily here to talk about and promote, which is called Man-Made, The Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods. And can you give us some background, Rita, as to what the book is basically about, the theme of it, etc.?
What the book is about, and actually let me tell you the backstory on it, because I think it will kind of set things up. So a couple of years ago, actually at this point in time, having looked at my notes, I'll say 3 years ago, when they were first coming out with all those shows on 2012, when they really were just hitting the airwaves, and that 2012 movie, not that I'm including that, came out, my husband, my co-author, Wayne LaLiberty, and I would watch these shows, and they would talk about things like, well, the Mayan calendar, this, and, this is what it says. And they would make comments that would say, well, and the Hopi and the Hindu tradition, they count cycles of time and they agree. And for some reason, we kept feeling like we were missing something. My little, I want to know about these ancient traditions was going, yeah, but what do they say? What do the Egyptians say? What do all these people say? And when I started researching what they were saying was not what they were talking about on TV. They don't have the same end date. They don't, they say similar things, but that's not what you were led to believe in the show. And so it kind of started me on this quest of digging and looking and touching and feeling. And one of the next things that we ended up touching on, because I started reading the Vishnu Purana, which is this very dry and boring book. Or actually, it's 6 books. But I like books like that. I don't know why. And they told this story about Manu, which is a fish. And Manu saves the world and humanity from a devastating flood. And the way the story reads was so similar to Noah's flood, the story we all know out of the Bible, that it just really caught our attention. And so we started digging into flood stories. And one of the things we found, which is kind of the guiding force in this book, was that when you look at mythology worldwide, even though the names might be changed and this detail over there might be different or that detail over there might be different, they all pretty much tell the same story. And so that really is what 2 things we did. One was we were bringing to the forefront that, if everybody's telling the same story, then there must be a bit of truth going on in what they're saying. And then the other thing that we found was that even in the books that are available today, no one ever sat down and tried to put these stories into any kind of timeline and chronology. And once you start digging through them, they actually unfold into a very interesting story, which is what the book ultimately is about. The story of the gods who walk the earth.
Okay. So that was sort of like the inspiration behind it as to the actual writing of it. And how would you sort of summarize the actual sort of content and theories that you present in the book? Which will obviously dig into deeper, but I mean, for people who want sort of, a sort of a to-the-point summary, how would you explain that?
I mean, if I was going to give, the 25-word or less summary, my comment would be that what we uncovered, because it really pushed against our beliefs, what we were uncovering was not what we believed. And so, but what we uncovered was, it appears based on mythology that there were a group of beings, many times represented as hermaphroditic, half man, half snake, half frog, some kind of reptilian kind of thing. And I'm not saying reptilian is like reptilian, but just amphibious. They came to the Earth in what they tend to call the cosmic egg and set up camp. And through a number of a series of genetic experiments, through a number of different levels of beings, ultimately mankind was created. But that's after 3 different levels of creation happening as far as, descendants of this progenitor race, leaving us with mankind. And in between all of these things, it's like they are filled with espionage and conflict, and one god's fighting with this god. You think it's bad on the earth, where this country's fighting that country. The gods were not any better. I think they were worse. They had better equipment.
Okay. I kind of found the sort of subtitle that you have for this book, Man-Made, to be interesting. The Chronicles of Our Extraterrestrial Gods. Are you saying that, should we interpret them as literal extraterrestrials or literal gods, or is gods, the interpretation of how the ancients perceive these extraterrestrials, or is it meant to be, that they're one and the same?
When you read the myth, it becomes evident, in my opinion, that the progenitors, the first group that came here, were not from this earth. They were not evolved through, natural selection, the whole Darwinian thing. They came here as fully capable beings. And so over time, this group has been identified as the gods, but we make a very clear distinction between, like, the creator god who created the universe, and as I love, as Georgios Zouklos loves to say, the big G god, and we find these guys as being the small G gods. They were critical in producing what happened on this planet, I think, including a certain amount of terraforming, but they're not the all omnipotent entity that many people see as God.
Okay. So would that mean, I know it's a lot of it's theoretical, but does that mean that we're talking about another race of beings like us but far more advanced, or some sort of lower level of a deity-like entity?
Based on, and I'm going to say their technology, they were much more advanced than us. Emotionally, not so sure, because they didn't seem particularly nice.
Right.
But they were just peeps coming here on mission, not quite sure what. We can talk about that and, some of the stuff we uncovered, but, yeah, I kind of lost my train of thought, so I'm just going to...
No, that's all right. I know it's a sort of far-reaching, complicated subject, but if we go back to sort of, I guess, the beginning's kind of the best place to start. Where, for you at least, does all this sort of kick off, in terms of something from somewhere sort of interacting with us on our world and provoking and creating these various legends and stories and cultures even?
as far as where did the myth start, or the culture?
Yeah, well, I guess the interaction of these entities, how and where did it begin, or at least as far as we can tell, and, what did it all imply?
Well, and I'm going to put a little twist on this. One of the things, the conclusions that we ended up coming to in the book is when you, mankind, in the chronology that these stories actually unfold, is actually comes at the very end of the book, because there's all of these things happening in these creations and these beings and these wars and this and that and the other thing, and then there's mankind. And so people have this thought that there was all of this interaction with mankind, but really, mankind is kind of a footnote in the entire story. Okay. And one of the things we believe is that the stories that we tell are not our stories, mankind's stories about the gods, but actually the gods' stories about themselves. And what's interesting is that there's some myth that supports it. In the Sumerian tradition, they talk about the Ones, who are these half-man, half-fish people that live in the water that actually came to early man and taught them stuff, and some of what they taught them was their history.
Okay. And can you get into that a little bit then? That what was the history, the origins, etc., as we understand it?
Okay. The mythology typically starts with what's called the cosmic egg. Actually, if you think from the biblical story, God created the heaven and the earth. And then most mythology starts with this concept of an earth being waste and void and this darkness covering an abyss. But in this abyss of nothing or blackness is typically this egg. But when you start to describe the egg, inside the egg are the beginnings of man or the gods. According to the Dogon, there are 8 half man, half fish beings that live inside this egg. I'm just thinking, Egyptian culture, they have the Onas that are inside the egg. They are either half man, half frog, or half man, half snake, depending on if you're male or female. And so it seems like you get this consistency of these either hermaphroditic, because they're not sure if what they're talking about is a male-female pair or if it's a hermaphroditic pair, because they tend to be opposites. And you even find that same continuity of the concept of opposites in China today with the yin-yang. You have the male and the female. And so they're not sure if these beings were hermaphroditic, although in China they do talk about that the first 3 gods were hermaphrodites, and then the ones that were born after were born male and female. I mean, it's interesting when you start looking at mythology, all right, not Christianity per se, or, Judeo-Christianity, where they're pretty upfront with what they're talking about.
Okay.
But according to them, they come to, I like to say Earth, but one of the things that we experienced was that, I started off talking about the whole concept of 2012 and the different cycles of time. But one of the concepts that we ran into an issue with is that in some cultures, they talk about 4 cycles of time. So like in Hinduism, they have the 4 yugas, which makes up one big cycle. But when you get into some of the Native American traditions, they talk about 5. And what we did was we started looking for key concepts and key ideas that proliferated these storylines. And one of the key points that we found was this dialogue about a golden age, or having everything, bring plants and products being brought forth naturally and easily, and, no fighting, and just this idea of just this like paradise. but there was a history before that. Now, some cultures start their first cycle at this golden age, while other ones actually tell a history before that. And it really confused us as to what was going on. And so we threw out this theory, you know, and I'm saying this, we threw out this theory, was that this first group of progenitors actually went to Mars. And our belief is that they were there at the beginning of the formation of the galaxy, our solar system, about 4.5 million years ago. One of the things that has baffled scientists is that within 2 million years, the surface of Mars had water on it, and it was already showing the first signs of life. But not much after that, about 3.8 billion, did I say million before? Billion, 3.8 billion years ago, we started getting hit with meteors, which is called the late bombardment period. And during that time, Mars got hit so much that they lost their magnetic field, and so they lost their atmosphere. Okay, so that's kind of the science piece that's going on. But in the meantime, in mythology, we have this group of progenitor gods who had their children. And so in that group, we had Uranus, who had his child. He had the Titans, which were his children. There were the Cyclopses. There were, and these giant people. Well, they revolted against Uranus. I mean, there's the story of Kronos taking the sickle and castrating his father. But in other myths, they tell the same basic story about this usurping of power, and then the rebels taking off and going to someplace else, of them getting kicked out, of them, taking over control. Mm-hmm. Also, at the same time, there are myths that talk about this great destruction that happens at the end of the first world. And so taking all of these things together, so the late heavy bombardment period happens, and its worst period was about 3.8 years ago. Well, lo and behold, 3.8 years ago, billion years ago, is when the first signs of life appeared on the Earth, which they, again, still don't know how that happened either. And so even though there's not direct evidence, it did explain why some cultures talked about 5 cycles and 4 in others, with the golden age starting actually on the physical Earth, but our history in the solar system starting somewhere else in an earlier period of time. And so that was what was going on in that period. One of the things that I find very interesting is when you start looking at these myths is just the parallels that happen. But moving forward, it's like, okay, so there is this new start that happened, we think on the Earth, and there was this group that took control, characterized by Kronos in Greek mythology, by Enki in Sumerian mythology, by Quetzalcoatl in Mayan and Aztec mythology, and all of those, they're associated to this golden age. And one of my favorite quotes that I found, and it was by the Spanish conqueror, back in the day, in the 1500s, and one of the things he says, and actually it was in South America, he is chronicling what he's learning from the indigenous people, and they say that, that the native people here believe that their land is Yunca, that they can have crops that can grow here in 5 days, and over the hill over there, they think that, how could it be different in this area versus that area, where it can grow in 5 days here, but not grow in 5 days there? And the Spanish could not understand that concept. But if you are, talking about the gods and their technology, and actually in South America, they have found, areas where there's soil that is so rich that it would grow plants, very hardy plants and very good plants quickly. But again, that same mythology, it's like with Kronos, the plants grew effortlessly. No one had to work for their, their labors. They tell the same story.
Okay. And would it be correct to say that, because, you pointed out, your conclusions, how you feel some of these sort of ancient, strange creatures like the Cyclops, etc., were connected. Do you think the fact that, there are a lot of these sort of amazing legends from certain specific parts of the world of fantastic creatures, does that mean that certain specific parts of the planet, do you think, were targeted by these beings, for contact, rather than it being sort of an overall across the planet kind of situation, because we get a lot of these stories, from the Middle East and Rome, Greece, and South America, but, perhaps less so from other parts of the world. So do you feel there was sort of a targeting of certain places, or is that just me speculating?
That's a really good question, and it's a really challenging one to answer. There's two possible scenarios in that, there were centers that these gods set up around the world and then taught them the mythology, like the ones in the Americas, and they were taught the mythology. The other possibility is that the mythology that the culture was established prior to, and the mythology was established prior to really the expansion of mankind on the planet. And it goes back that far in time. But when we start using that, we're talking at least 60,000 years ago, because we find parallel myths that come out of Australia. And that would be the oldest timeline. I could see if you have a myth, in the Middle East, in Babylon, and then you have a parallel myth in Egypt, or maybe even in Africa. I can get that. It's spread, people travel, people talk. That would make sense. But when you get stories that are uncannily similar, the same, in my opinion, in the New World or in South America, it's really hard, not South America, in Australia. And can I give an example? Because this is my favorite one. So in Norse tradition, there's Thor. I think, probably everyone's seen the movie, the